Welcome to our training on hazard communication for the construction industry. Your right to know about the chemicals you work with. In this course, we will talk about written hazard communication programs. Why do written hazard communication programs matter? Every job site is unique, but how we communicate about hazards should be the same no matter where you work. That's why OSHA has a hazard communication standard. In this course, you'll learn about what is included in every written program and what you should expect in terms of responsibilities and training. After completing this training, you should know the purpose and contents of the Hazard Communication Standard. You should be able to classify the physical and health hazards of chemicals and recognize the responsibilities of chemical manufacturers, chemical importers and companies, and the types of information in a written hazard communication program. You should also know what training and information to expect after this training. The OSHA Hazard Communication Standard is found in Title 29 of the Code of Federal Regulations in Part 1910, Section 1200. OSHA safety and health regulations for construction require that all companies who perform construction operations in the United States follow the HazCom standard. The primary purpose of the standard is to make sure that workers understand chemical hazards and know how to follow precautions to reduce the incidence of injuries and illnesses. What's the primary purpose of the HazCom standard? The HazCom standard covers 4 major areas: hazard classification, the written program, safety data sheets and labels, and training. What are the 4 major areas covered by the HazCom standard? Select all that apply. The HazCom standard covers 4 major areas: hazard classification, the written program, safety data sheets and labels, and training. The global health and safety community, including OSHA, agreed to adopt a common, globally harmonized system of classification and labeling of chemicals, or GHS, to reduce worker confusion, injuries, and illnesses. Many countries had to revise rules, regulations, and standards regarding the communication of chemical safety information when they agreed to adopt the GHS. Changes to the U.S. OSHA HazCom standard included new hazard classification criteria. GHS specifies criteria for classifying health and physical hazards as well as mixtures. GHS requires labels include a harmonized signal word, precautionary statements, pictograms, and a hazard statement for each hazard class and category. GHS also introduced a 16-section format for safety data sheets. You may recall that these were previously known as Material Safety Data Sheets, or MSDSs. The HazCom standard covers 2 types of hazards: physical hazards and health hazards. Physical hazards, such as flammability or explosive potential, can cause serious accidents and injuries. Health hazards, as the name suggests, can affect a person's health, either in the short term or in the long term. People often think of chemicals as either health hazards or physical hazards. Chemicals can, and typically do, present both types of hazards. Construction workers may use phosphoric acid for concrete etching. It can severely irritate and burn the skin and eyes, but it is not a compound that is explosive, flammable, strongly oxidizing, or unstable. What kind of hazard does it present? Construction workers may use acetone for tasks such as dissolving oils or thinning paint. It can irritate the skin and eyes. Repeated exposure can affect a person's central nervous system. It is also very flammable. What kind of hazard does it present? Different people have different responsibilities with regard to chemicals used in the United States. Chemical manufacturers must evaluate the hazards of the chemicals they manufacture, including hazard classes and categories, and then affix a HAZCOM-compliant label and provide a safety data sheet with each chemical they ship. Importers and distributors of chemicals must also ensure labels are on chemical products and transmit a safety data sheet with each chemical they ship. Companies that use chemicals have more responsibilities. They must identify all the hazardous chemicals on the job site. This is called a hazardous chemicals inventory. Prepare and implement a written hazard communication plan. Make sure that all containers are properly labeled. Make sure that there are current SDSs for all hazardous chemicals, and provide training about chemical hazards and precautions. Select the appropriate party who is responsible for each action. It's okay if you aren't sure. We'll explain the answers on the next page. Companies that use chemicals have more responsibilities. They must identify all the hazardous chemicals on the job site. This is called a hazardous chemicals inventory. Prepare and implement a written hazard communication plan. Make sure that all containers are properly labeled. Make sure that there are current SDSs for all hazardous chemicals, and provide training about chemical hazards and precautions. Select the appropriate party who is responsible for each action. It's okay if you aren't sure. Please take a moment to review the correct answers. Note that anyone potentially exposed to chemicals in the workplace must be provided training about chemical hazards. Companies are required to identify and list all hazardous chemicals on their job sites that workers could potentially be exposed to. They must consider chemicals in all forms: liquids, solids, gases, vapors, fumes, and mists. They must identify chemicals in containers, including pipes, and they must consider chemicals generated in work operations such as welding fumes, dusts, and exhaust fumes. The Written Hazard Communication Program reflects what is happening on your job site. Generic plans must be adapted to the specific conditions at your work locations. The written plan must include all of the following: the hazardous chemicals present at the job site, who is responsible for the various aspects of the program, where written materials will be made available, how information will be exchanged at multi-employer job sites, and how your job site will meet the requirements for labels and other forms of warning, safety data sheets, and information and training. Companies must also describe how they will inform workers of the hazards of non-routine tasks. Pipes and piping systems containing hazardous substances or transporting substances in a hazardous state must be labeled according to the standards requirements. On construction job sites, there should be an exchange of chemical information between the site owner, general contractor, and any subcontractors coming on site. The point is, you can be affected by chemicals present and being applied by other parties, so you have the right to know about those chemicals. Other parties also have a right to information about chemicals your company has on site or will be using. After completing this course, you will need job site-specific information. Your company is responsible for making sure you receive additional information before using chemicals for the first time, when new hazards are introduced to your work area, and when there is any new information available about hazards for which you've already been trained. Companies must tell workers about the requirements of the Hazard Communication Standard and where hazardous chemicals are present at the job site. Companies must also communicate where to find the written program, hazardous chemical inventory, and SDSs, the physical and health hazards of chemicals, how you can protect yourself from chemical hazards, and how to detect the presence or release of a hazardous chemical. Don't wait for the information. Take the initiative to ask questions and become aware of the chemical hazards and precautions on your job site. Your health and safety are at stake. You received training about how to use a solvent to thin paint. Do you need more information if you're going to use the same chemical for sheet metal degreasing? Workers have both a need and a right to know the hazards and identities of the chemicals they are exposed to when working. You should now know the purpose and contents of the Hazard Communication Standard. You should be able to classify the physical and health hazards of chemicals and recognize the responsibilities of chemical manufacturers, chemical importers and companies, and the types of information in a written hazard communication program. You should also know what training and information to expect after this training.